Okay, good afternoon to all the panelists. It's really a pleasure for me to be in this panel, very important panel. And I first of all thank Dr. Nagalakshmi for making me a part of this panel, and also Amity University for inviting me. And we have a very distinguished panelist. We have Professor Badrul Alam, Professor Rumki Basu. Madam Basu is there? Professor Santa Burma and Ambassador Yovinder. And I think the topic also for this technical session is also very interesting. Earlier we talked of Asia Pacific. Now we are talking of Indo Pacific. So what actually necessitated for this change? That is an interesting question. And when we are recognizing the importance of both the oceans, Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean, that also becomes very interesting, because we are giving strategic importance to some part of Indian Ocean, not all part, and also some part of the Pacific. So that is interesting. And the whole construct of Indo-Pacific, that is also interesting and also very controversial. Interesting because of the ongoing power shift, global balance of power shifting from Atlantic to Pacific, and from north to south, and from from Europe to Asia. So there are so many changes in the global balance of power, and economically also the region is becoming very important. And on the other hand, we have also a very interesting situation at the global level, when America, everybody is talking of now post-American world, and Chinese, the China is also trying to replace or displace, you can say, the United States, at least if not at the global level, at least in Asia. And particularly this geographical construct, Indo-Pacific, and now we are calling it as Indo, Pacific, not Asia Pacific. And whether this, whole construct of Indo-Pacific, somehow, gives enhanced importance to India's, rise as a global major power, that is also an interesting question. And I think, this panel will definitely cover so many issues that is related to the whole conception of Indo-Pacific, the policies of major powers, and how they are trying to leverage, trying to enhance their influence in the whole region. So that will be really interesting. We have some 2 hours for the session. I think each speaker, we can have half an hour for each speaker. 20 minutes, I think 15 to 20 minutes we can have, we speaker will talk about around 15 to 20 minutes, and after that, we'll have some 10 to 15 minutes for discussion. I think that will be fine. I think it is fine for all the panelists.
Yes, sir, Professor Upendra sir, just a small, we would like to give introduction to all the speakers over here. I would request, because this was something which missed out by our convener. We sincerely apologize for that.
Yes,
so
yes.
I would request, kindly allow us to give the brief introduction of all the speakers, all the esteemed speakers over here. So I would request Roshni, who is here, I think. Can you please? Yeah, please go ahead and give brief introduction. I'm really sorry for this some technical problems and some miscommunications. Thank you so much. Yeah, Roshni, can you please give an introduction of all the speakers, please? Roshni. Lakshmi, can you go ahead and do this?
Excuse me, I'm Hiba here.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So good afternoon to one and all. On behalf of Amity Institute of International Studies, I, Hiba Rahman K, welcome you all to the second day of Education 2021. Today, we will continue with the plenary session 2 of the conference on the theme Asia Pacific versus Indo-Pacific Construction. I extend a very warm welcome to our distinguished chair, Professor Ubendra Chowdhury, for the session on Asia Pacific and Indo-Pacific Construction. Professor Ubendra Chowdhury is currently a professor at Aligarh Muslim University, where he teaches subjects, namely international politics, government, and politics in South Asia, major issues and concerns, and research methodology. He conducts research on international politics with a special focus on Indo Pacific region. He has served both as the member secretary and director of the India Council of Social Science Research, New Delhi, under the Ministry of Human Resource Development, Government of India from 2014 to 2019. Professor Ubendra received his PhD from CPS SSS Jawaharlal Nehru University in 2000 on the thesis titled India's Ballistic Missile Program. Professor Chowdhury has authored a book titled Nuclear Risk Reduction Measures in South Asian Problems and Prospects, for which he has conferred with Kodikara Research Award by Regional Center for Strategic Studies, Colombo, Sri Lanka for the year 2001-2. He has also contributed several book chapters, encyclopedia entries, commissioned and research papers to referred journals in India, United States, UK, Bangladesh, Australia, and Singapore. Professor Chowdhury has also completed several independent research projects funded by the Indian and foreign sponsoring agencies and attended several conferences in India, US, UK, Russia, Germany, Canada, Australia, China, and many more. Welcome, sir. Now I welcome Ambassador Yogendra Kumar to the session. Ambassador Yogendra Kumar retired from the Indian Foreign Service in 2012 in the rank of Secretary of the Government of India. He has served as an Indian ambassador to the Philippines with concurrent accreditation to the Pacific island called Palau, Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands. Formerly, he served as the High Commissioner to Namibia and Ambassador to Tajikistan, amidst which he also handled Afghanistan affairs. He has served as a faculty of the Indian National College and in the Ministry of External Affairs. He has handled multilateral organizations or dialogues such as G8, GS dialogues, ASEAN, EAS, IBSA, IORA, etc. Post-retirement, he has written and actively spoken on foreign policy and security affairs. He has authored a book titled Diplomatic Dimensions of Maritime Challenges for India in the 21st Century. He has edited and contributed to the book With the Indian Ocean Maritime Order, containing presentations or articles by eminent security and foreign service experts at a seminar organized by him in November 2016 on Prime Minister's landmark speech on Indian ocean policy. I welcome you, sir. Now I welcome Dr. Srish Kumar Pathak. Dr. Pathak is currently teaching world politics at Amity University, Noida. He has more than 7 years of teaching experience as an assistant professor. He has headed the Department of Political Science at Galgosius University, Noida. He did his MPhil and PhD from the Center of South Asian Studies, SISJNU, New Delhi. He's a keen observer of Indian foreign policy as well as world affairs. Dr. Pathak is also actively engaged in political literacy campaign in India. Welcome, sir. Our next panelist is Dr. Mohammad Badrul Alam. He has been in the teaching career of the spanning of 2 decades in USA, Japan, and India at various educational institutions. He was also a professor of political science at Jamia Millia University from 2006 and has also headed the department. Dr. Alam served as Honorary Director at Jamia Millia University, New Delhi, starting from March 2015 till March 2016. He was also a Professor of Political Science at Jamia Millia University and the head of the department. Professor Mohammad Badrul Alam completed his PhD in American Studies from Cornell University, Dhaka, New York in 1990 and has also completed his MA in History and Masters in Government from Cornell University, Dhaka, New York. He also holds an MPhil in American Studies and in MA Political Science. Professor Alam has many research publications and articles to his credits. A quite recent one being India-Japan Relations in the Era Globalisation, which was published in the year 2018. Professor Alam has got many honors, on which ICCR, India Chair, Russian State University for the Humanities, Moscow, Russia, 2017, as well as visiting fellowship, Winston-Salem State University and University of North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina, USA, in September 2014. His important work pieces are a comparative nuclear strategy of India and Pakistan and the China factor, and mapping the contours of state politics in Odisha in the context of elections in recent decades. I welcome you, sir. Our next panelist is Dr. Satish Kumar. Dr. Satish Kumar is presently a professor of political science, School of Social Sciences, IGNOU, New Delhi. Dr. Kumar was a former professor and dean of Central University of Haryana, Mahendragarh. He also worked as an associate professor, Center for International Relations, Central University of Jharkhand, Ranchi, and as an associate professor at the Department of Political Science, Central University of Haryana, Mahendragarh. Dr. Kumar's fields of interest range from Indian foreign policy and bilateral relations, Naxalism and national security, Central Asia, Indo Pacific, and Southeast Asia. Dr. Kumar is a prolific writer and published more than 3,000 articles in national dailies, both in Hindi and English. In the above mentioned fields on contextual and concurrent issues, he has written 4 books and 26 research articles to his credit, published in reputed national and international peer-reviewed journals. Dr. Kumar has delivered more than 25 invited lectures in different universities across the country and also actively engages in political discussions as a panelist of different electronic media. Sir, I welcome you. Last but not the least, I welcome all scholars who have joined us through Zoom and watching us live on Facebook. We are extremely glad to have you all here today. Now, without further ado, sir, I would kindly request you to take the session forward. So, Professor Upendra Chaudhary, sir, please continue the session.
Yeah, thank you, Roshni, for such a nice introduction. And I welcome all the panelists. And as I said, the topic is really interesting because everybody earlier talked about Indo-Pacific. Now, earlier talked about Asia-Pacific. Now we're talking of Indo-Pacific. And we have a distinguished panelist, galaxy of scholars who have worked in different ways that affect the security and foreign policy issues of the region. So without wasting much time, I would suggest that Professor Badrul Alam, can I request to chair the session? As I said, I'm really sorry that I'm now in Bhubaneswar and standing just near the highway. And I promised to Dr. Nagalakshmi that I will just initiate the discussion and say goodbye to all the panelists. Although I'm really interested to listen all of you, but because of these strategic constraints, I think you will all excuse me. So Professor Panel, Professor Badrul Alam, over to you. Please go ahead and chair the session. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Upendra sir, to join the session at least for this many minutes. But for this, you'll have to come to our campus, addressing our students. So that will be your penalty now.
I promise. Thank you, Dr. Nagalakshmi, and thank you all the panelists. For I know that you all are great stalwarts in this area of Indo-Pacific, and I think the debate will definitely be interesting. And I look forward to personally communicate with and interact with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So over to Professor Badrul Alam, sir.
Is it Professor Nagalakshmi?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I think since we have in our midst His Excellency the Ambassador, I think it will be very appropriate and fitting if he can be the person to take the lead.
Excellent, excellent. That's an excellent proposal, sir. Yeah. Ambassador Yogendra, sir.
Sir, please go ahead and lead the show.
Yes, sir. Sir, you are on mute. Yogendra, sir, you are on mute. Kindly unmute.
I'm not on mute.
Yeah. Now you are audible.
I'm audible, okay. No, I was actually requesting Professor Badrul Alam to actually preside over the session because his career is very distinguished and you would have learned something more in his introductory remarks. So perhaps why don't you kick off the session? I don't know what's happening.
Okay.
Shall I start?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
So, okay, so I'm the first speaker, so I'll start then.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I want to thank the chair, Professor Upendra Chaudhary, and of course, Professor Badrul Alam, to Professor Nagalakshmi Raman, Director and Head of MIT Institute of Studies, MIT University, Dr. Divya Anand, and of course, the students of the university. So I feel truly privileged to join the company of fellow panelists, all of whom are actually niche experts on the theme which is being discussed now. And I wish to congratulate the Amity Institute of International Studies for setting up this international conference on the ongoing churns in contemporary geopolitics, which touches us all in diverse but direct ways in our globalized existence. The theme of this session, Asia-Pacific versus Indo-Pacific constructions, is an imaginative one. It seeks to detect the contemporary paradigms when these are difficult to detect in our deepening geopolitical fluidity. Such inquiry is important in not only assessing the hard kinetic power relationships, but also the moving parts which are sought to be managed through them. And here, if I may just take a pause, while I was introduced, there's one more book I've written most recently. It's an interesting title page with Gandhiji and Ghaffar Khan, the AFPAC region. But the title is Geopolitics in the Era of Globalization. And I discuss actually geopolitical churns and really what has happened and what might have happened. So what is the context of these two constructions? To me, it is the lingering effect or the short life of the US's unipolar moment when it emerged as a hyperpower or the ultrapower, in the words of the former French Foreign Minister Vedrine, following the neat erasure of USSR from the geopolitical map of the Cold War world. The subsequent triumphalist formulaic approach of the West, especially the US, towards the managing of the new transformational political changes in the former Soviet Union, Eastern and Central Europe, the Balkans, as well as elsewhere in the world, resulted not only in the quick passage of the US's unipolar moment, but also chaotic changes practically across the entire globe. Moreover, this ideological triumphalism also manifested in the weakening of the UN and affiliated institutions, and accent was put on unilateralism on the part of the big powers in their international relations. This doctrinaire approach was recognized as the primary cause of the increasing frequency of regional and global financial crises. The International Monetary Fund's Independent Evaluation Office ascribed in 2011 the IMF's wrong assessment of the 2008 global economic and financial crisis to, as it called, I just quote, high degree of groupthink, intellectual capture, as well as political constraints. No guesses, no prizes for guessing. The upshot of these messy transitions has been a significant shift in global power equations, whilst global and regional multilateral institutions no longer reflect this shift correspondingly. There is a profound but confused Western debate about the whys and wherefores, about the decline of the liberal order and its uncertain future prospects, and a pervasive deglobalization sentiment amongst the very publics in the West, which have been the primary drivers of globalization. This debate has intensified with the less than elegant exit of the US forces from Afghanistan after a 20-year-long effort of state building, which with the now rising refrain that the non-Europeans are somehow incapable of having democratic systems. Meanwhile, globalization is on an inexorable steady march under the tractive force of communication and transportation technologies. It is affecting institutional capacities, socio-economic churn, and identities, raising fundamental questions about the organizing principles of political economy. The challenges of global warming, regionalized and even internationalized national conflicts, cascade of collapsing states, jihadist terrorism, transnational crime, mass internal displacements and external migrations, global financial crises, and black swan events like the current pandemic affect every single person in the world. The deepening geopolitical distrust makes these common challenges and nuclear weapons proliferation and other ground rules for confidence building, even of the Cold War period, highly problematic. The UN Secretary General, on the eve of the current UNGA session, has already described this situation as far more complex than the Cold War. So what are the geopolitical constructs of Asia and the Indo-Pacific, of Asia-Pacific and the Indo-Pacific? This setting, which I have just now outlined, frames these two geopolitical constructs when we analyze their larger implications for global affairs, India included. The overall characterization would help us in understanding where we are headed with these constructs. So Asia-Pacific, since the end of the Second World War, signifies the US security architecture for the Pacific for the containment of the Soviet Union and China. In one way, the facets of the Cold War superpower rivalry. This was sustained by means of US military bases in East and Southeast Asia, as well as the military alliance system set up by it to prevent Soviet ingress into Western Pacific, as well as to prevent the spread of communist regimes encapsulated by the dominant theory. The military bases were located in strategic islands, as well as basing arrangements with alliance partners. In the US geopolitical parlance, the term Asia was used for East Asia and Southeast Asian countries, including the area of the Soviet Far East. India and the subcontinent were called South Asia. In that background, in that sense, the power equilibrium then was a subset, or rather a backyard of the Cold War bipolar world, whose strategic fulcrum remained the Atlantic. The end of the Cold War also resulted in a power vacuum due to the disengagement of the US from the region, with Russia with its own internal distractions and the yet to be developed Chinese naval capabilities, despite the latter's episodic skirmishes with the other Southeast Asian claimants for the South China Sea land features. Within this attenuated but wider geopolitical construct, this period also saw the emergence of ASEAN as a reinvented organization aiming to provide a regional security framework, and later for the Western Pacific as well. The strategic milieu of the Asia-Pacific began to change fundamentally with the growing economic and military power of China and the deepening distrust and geopolitical rivalry between the US and Russia in different parts of the world. Unlike the Western, European, and North American regions, there are no overarching economic and security frameworks for the Asia-Pacific, nor comparable political systems. These contradictions and enduring Cold War era hotspots have generated a geopolitical dynamic which is exposed to both intra-regional and extra-regional shocks. The divergence between the regional countries' strategic partnership with the US and at the same time intensifying economic linkages with China injected intra-regional disequilibrium due to the rising tension between US and China's own assertive nationalism in relations with the regional countries. The contours of the current Asia-Pacific geopolitical construct started shaping up about 2 decades ago, with Russia and China finding significant strategic convergence due to the increasingly tense relations with the US, and more recently with the Western European countries, Japan and Australia. Indo-Pacific, the more recent geopolitical buzzword, also has history dating back to the end of the Second World War and, in fact, the Indian independence in 1947. Despite the early India-China bonhomie, the realpolitik practitioners in Beijing saw India as its strategic rival, despite the latest espousal of non-alignment and Afro-Asian solidarity, and developed closer balancing relations with Pakistan and made considerable efforts to bring Burma under its influence. The US and India and US and UK, disappointed with both these elements of Indian foreign policy, aimed nevertheless to see India emerge as a rival to China, even while using pro-West leanings of Pakistan for their Cold War ends. The area of responsibility of the erstwhile US Pacific Command, or more recently renamed as Indo Pacific Command, extends across, and that hasn't changed, just the name has changed, extends across the Pacific up to the imaginary India-Pakistan maritime boundary in the Arabian Sea, or as the Americans wish to call, from Hollywood to Bollywood. Whereas the US Centcom and AfricaCom and even Eurocom powers, they actually cover the area from Pakistan further west. And in one sense, this division also signifies, in my view, despite the close India-US relations, the strategic convergence between the two countries is not absolutely foursquare. Although the ground for it was being prepared earlier, one can see it shaping up with President Obama's pivot to Asia around 2012, which was preceded by his Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, who offered at an ASEAN summit in Hanoi in July 2010, US good offices for mediation in the South China Sea dispute. The Chinese side saw that as a US strategic move to alter the emerging balance of power in the region. This US pivot entailed, along with other things, a heightened US strategic posture in the Western Pacific, with more frequent rotations of US military assets and personnel through the so-called lily pads, which were not comparable to its Cold War era bases. Conceptually, it is more maritime focused in terms of the state of the balance of power in South China Sea, the East China Sea and other adjacent waters, and the Western Pacific. Although tensions prevail in the East China Sea due to the Chinese assertiveness over the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands issue with Japan, big power confrontation involving China and the US is particularly frequent in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait on account of China's excessive, deliberately ambiguous maritime claims in these two waters, and concerning the former's land features, that is South China Sea land features. The other contention issue relate to the freedom of navigation and overflight in the high seas and sustainable exploitation of maritime resources. Yet the geographical expanse of Indo-Pacific construct also varies depending upon the country. India, Japan, and ASEAN, unlike US and Australia, consider both the Pacific and the Indian Ocean as the Indo-Pacific. Some strategic analysts think that invoking the expression Indo-Pacific is to bring India into the Pacific Ocean region. The Indian position is that, considering its own geographical definition, there is a strategic continuum between the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean, even though India's perceptions of its own strategic role in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean vary. China considers Indo-Pacific as an expression of US rivalry, aiming to contain it, and continues the expression Asia-Pacific. Taking a convergent strategic position, Russia also concurs with China, although it is not a significant presence in the South China Sea, even as it has relocated strategic assets towards its Far East, keeping in mind the existing power equilibrium there. It is more focused on the Eurasian landmass aspect of it rather than the maritime, whereas Chinese are equally conscious of both. The ASEAN Outlook document of 2019 takes a somewhat ambivalent position on Asia-Pacific versus Indo-Pacific issue, being mindful of the Chinese sensitivities as well. Its focus remains, nevertheless, maritime. In the context of the larger global discourse, the Indo-Pacific term has gained greater currency due to its maritime content, devoid of its perceived China containment stance or hypothesization on that issue. Yet it may be concluded that the Asia-Pacific versus Indo-Pacific are becoming competing binary in global balance of power, with each trying to tilt the scale in its favor to influence the other. But as explained in this setting, these two geographical constructs are not neatly divided like NATO and the Warsaw Pact, or in the common parlance of that time, the First World and Second World. The circumstances are diametrically different, and constituents of national power have changed too. So what about the constructions? As far as institutional constructions holding up geopolitical constructs go, these two are not a reprise of NATO and the Warsaw Pact, since the latter were a consolidation of power equilibrium rooted in the outcome of the Second World War. Their institutional scaffolding was firmer and separately sustained by similar political systems based on organizing principles derived from ideologies. For sure, both of these competing systems were lumbering along, buffeted by internal and external shocks, and eventually were stepped aside by the force of history. Our two binaries are also not of the same conception as those of Mackinder and Maham, who also encapsulated geopolitical circumstances at the time of their writing. Our binary is more evolutionary, institutionally speaking, reflecting the rapid pace of change in the last 3 decades. They are also being tried to be shaped in the context of the weakened global order and therefore the shifting power equations, and global institutions, unlike again the circumstances of the establishment of the UN and the affiliated systems. For this reason, these institutions are still seeking international credibility amongst countries whose leaders are in mostly self-survival mode. Many are ad hoc or limited in membership, even with conflicting geopolitical interests or scope. The preference is for interoperability rather than alliances. Primary impulse is self-protection, but also, if possible, wherever possible, coercively push for whatever immediate advantage presents itself in a particular situation. Manifestly, such institutional capabilities do not measure up to the enormity of the current global challenges. Since there will be further discussion on the veritable alphabet soup of institutions dotting these two geopolitical constructs, I will only very briefly provide the historical evolution. The Indo-Pacific, speaking of the entire Indo-Pacific geographical stretch, some institutions are already engaged in it. The ASEAN are engaging in a dialogue with Indian Ocean Rim Association to cover a wide range of maritime issues, including meteorological, blue economy, disaster response, maritime security, etc. To enhance maritime domain awareness, interlinked surveillance systems are also being developed. Except for the maritime domain awareness issues, the other sets of dialogues, more in the bilateral and trilateral engagements, are in early phase with little ground impact. More from the balance of power point of view, the quadrilateral dialogue, the Quad, is a more recent development dating back to the 2017 Manila ASEAN and related summits. Comprising US, India, Japan, and Australia, it is developing an alternative vision for the Indo-Pacific for a more open and inclusive maritime order. But its agenda is more wide-ranging by covering connectivity, healthcare, resilient trade links, environment, maritime security, etc. No less important are the Malabar series of naval exercises by the same countries, which take place alternately in the Western Pacific and the Bay of Bengal, and now in the Arabian Sea. These are getting increasingly sophisticated for higher interoperability standards for these increasingly sophisticated lethal naval platforms. Besides, there are several sets of bilateral and trilateral military security dialogues involving all the 4 countries with other interlocutors in the region. Although these exercises have not taken place in the South China Sea, they are an important signal in terms of balance of power equilibrium, which are noted very carefully by China, but also Russia. As an alternative to Chinese military aggressiveness in the region and its ecologically and financially unsustainable infrastructure projects, it is being watched with great interest in terms of the leverage for other countries in their relations with China, for example. But there are also concerns in some South Asian countries about the rising military tensions in the region. That the recent developments, especially involving China, have caused concerns in other regions is signified by the US, France, and Germany developing their own Indo-Pacific strategies apart from the European Union, which also involve naval deployments in the region. Now, as regards the Asia-Pacific, the Eurasian landmass geopolitical salience has increased in the last 2 decades or so. Apart from China's strategic interest in the adjoining region, it is also a source of for China, it's a source of hydrocarbons, but it also provides space for its transit routes to other regions of the world to escape its Malacca dilemma. The institutions are a mix of reinvented Russia-dominated Soviet strategic institutional framework covering political security and economy, and those shaped as a result of Chinese strategic requirements. The broader functional division is security come political for Russia and economic for China. The viability of this division is under stress due to peculiar strategic interests of China and Russia in Afghanistan. The CSTO is a loose Russia-dominated military bloc, and SCO also has a military and security dimension. In the context of recent Afghanistan development, both these organizations are looking, or they are being galvanized, for a security role in Central Asia, as also a kind of security belt around it on the Central Asia-Afghanistan border. Despite their rising salience, they cannot be compared with either the Warsaw Pact or NATO, and both Russia and China are building relations on bilateral basis with the other member countries concerned. They are thus softer organizations for developing broader understandings on issues of interest, but not for any hard action. In 2015, The Eurasian Economic Union came into existence as a result of step-by-step agreements, the initiative of which was taken by Russia. But this has come into incompatibility challenges vis-a-vis China's own BRI program. It is still a work in progress, including the reconciliation of the Russian and Chinese Eurasian geopolitical objectives, and is far from providing a firm scaffolding for the Asia-Pacific construct. As regards India's role, both China and Russia now assess that India is becoming a strategic partner of the US, with China having an even stronger opinion in this regard. The latter, therefore, is much more conscious of the balance of power implications about India's role in SCO and the Indo Pacific, and feels that it can derive strategic leverage in its relationship as well as for balance of power purposes through its deliberate ambiguity on the line of actual control issue. For example, it insisted on Pakistan joining the SCO at the same time as India. And in 2006, it backtracked from an earlier agreed political framework for the resolution of the border issue, as the Malabar exercises around that time were gaining increasing sophistication. Nevertheless, the growing strategic and economic power of India opens up the space for it to pursue its own strategic goals, both in the Asia-Pacific and the Indo-Pacific, as something we can talk even later. So, in conclusion, I would say, framed in the context of a larger global setting, one can safely conclude that these two geopolitical constructs are unable to meet the global challenges which affect all of us at individual level. There are issues of institutional capacities as well as geopolitical distrust among the major players. If these constructs can evolve in a manner to establish an enduring power equilibrium and thereby obviate regional and global instability, they could create a conducive environment for tackling of these challenges at the level of the international community. In the meanwhile, all countries will need to rely on their own internal institutional strength and resilience to navigate through the choppy waters outside their shores. I thank you for your attention. Thank you so much. I finished. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible. Thank you so much, Ambassador Yogendra sir. Thank you so much. Professor Badrur Alam sir?
Yes.
Yeah, the floor is yours.
Right. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Naglakh, the Department of International Studies, Dr. Divya Anand, and all the faculty members and research scholars of AIIS, and also Binder Saha, the Director of the Dynamic International Politics, and all of the people who are associated with organizing this great and wonderful. Thank you once again. We just had an opportunity of listening to a very illuminating presentation by Ambassador Yogendra Kumar. I think we led very wisely about the contours of the Pacific vis-a-vis, and also tried to contextualize within a more contemporary setup how India fits into it and how other different elements and different nuances can also adjust and fit into this kind of scenario. For the purpose of my presentation today, I think this conference is very relevant because a lot of things are happening. Prime Minister Modi in Washington DC, talking to not only to President Joe Biden, but also talking to the Prime Minister of Australia, the Prime Minister of Japan, and number of
Sabhi students को message करो. If you are not attending the sessions, you are not getting the attendance of today's classes.
So basically, I think when we look at these terms like Asia-Pacific versus Indo-Pacific, a lot of things I think like maybe overlapping, and a lot of times I think we forget that basically I think it's also constructed as Ambassador Yogendra Kumar said, according to the power configuration. For example, I think most of us, the people who study international relations and politics, we do agree, and there is a consensus that the 19th century was basically European century dominated by Great Britain, America. Then the 20th century, for the most part, it was an American century, Pax Americana, and the 21st century I think again by the second decade of 2021, we are now seeing Pax Indica, like India is also becoming a very emerging power and upper tier economic power horse, along with competing other powers like China, Japan, and South Korea, etc., etc. So I think we have to see all those, the Indo Pacific, like the element, the word Pacific is pretty common between Asia and Pacific. So how much you stress the geographical expression of Asia Pacific versus Indo Pacific? Like in Indo Pacific, a lot of people say Indo does not necessarily mean India. Of course, India is a very predominant power, not only in South Asia, but also in larger part of Asian continent. But also it also looks into and takes care of the lot of interest of the Indian Ocean countries and also the littoral countries all along the Arabian Sea to the Bay of Bengal to Indian Ocean, all the way to the Strait of Malacca, etc., etc. And then tying up with the new policies, etc., from Japan to the Southeast Asia, ASEAN bloc, plus the down under Australia and New Zealand. So I think we have to see all those things in context. I think if there is one particular common denominator and common parameters in terms of the power dynamics in Asia Pacific and also Indo Pacific, it will be the following. Both the concepts are very fluid, it is dynamic, it is evolving, it is non-zero sum, and also it is interdependent. And Kyohan said it is complex interdependence. That will come in a minute. So I think this is the broad aspect in which we are talking about in terms of playing around, whether it is Asia Pacific, looking at from US, like when President Obama was there, he declared US not only as an Atlantic, transatlantic power, emphasizing on Atlantic alliance, but he also said America is also equally a Pacific power, depending on which way you look. If you look from New York, it is like an Atlantic power. If you look from Los Angeles and San Francisco, it looks more like a Pacific power, and the wider reach beyond Hawaii and Guam, etc., etc. So I think we have to look into that concept. And the Indo-Pacific, I think, particularly in the last couple of years, I think we are hearing more and more, particularly as India has emerged, and already as a lot of scholars, they agree that India is now one of the most leading countries and a powerful powerhouse in this part of the world. Having said that, I think for the purpose of this presentation, I have got another 15-20 minutes. What I'll do is I'll try to theorize the concept of Indo-Pacific from India's point of view, from India's foreign policy decision-making of the models. And I think those of us who are students of international politics and international relations, we love theories, and we try to replicate that. We try to model that and how far the Indian policy decision makers, they fit into that kind of thing. For example, since independence, 1947 till today, we have got several prime ministers from Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru to Sri Narendra Modi. And in between, we have got a long list of very illustrious prime ministers and decision makers. And I think if you look in a more holistic way, I think, and in also try to match it along with the mainstream IR theories, like for example, idealism and the liberal internationalism that was exemplified by Woodrow Wilson, etc. I think we saw that at the very beginning in 1947 to 1962, I would say the formative stage, the Nehruvian age, when India was trying to come up with a lot of new ideas and new thrust in international relations, in foreign policy decision making, whether it was non-alignment, whether it was India's participation in the United Nations, whether it was Panchsheel, the 5 principles, etc., etc. Then roughly from 1962 to 1991, and that's a long gap, like about 30 years, 3 decades, we see lots of ups and downs, starting with the debacle in China, India-China war, then 65, the Pakistan war. Then in between, we had a lot of domestic issues. We had a series of prime ministers from Lal Bahadur Shastri to Indira Gandhi to Rajiv Gandhi to Narasimha Rao. So it's in between, we had a coalition government of Morarji Desai and Charan Singh. So there is a lot of things. And I would say that particular phase was more like a self-help approach, more like a realist approach. We have to take care of our own national interest. Since 1991, P.V. Narasimha Rao, Dr. Manmohan Singh, and then onwards, the Gowda Gujral, the Gujral Doctrine, then downwards to Vajpayee, and then Dr. Manmohan Singh, UPA government 1, UPA 2, and now Narendra Modi 1 and Modi 2 government, NDA. We see a whole range of what I would say is pragmatism tinged with realism. So Of course, we are realist, but we do understand that we cannot carve the stone in one particular way. We cannot put all eggs in one particular basket. The way, for example, in the 70s and 80s, we used to put all eggs in the Soviet basket, the then Soviet Union. But today, I think we are trying to develop what we say as strategic autonomy, so that gives us the leverage to be friends with both Iran and Iraq, both Saudi Arabia and Israel, both China and Russia, both US and many other countries. So I think we have to do this policy of engagement in a spirit of pragmatism and in a spirit of realism, combining both and making a judicious mix. So I think that was the liberal international order and the idealistic order. Then I think we are also following all the decision makers from Nehru to Modi in terms of the realist paradigm. And Ambassador Yogendra Kumar also highlighted that one. Like some of the important components of realism, for example, as Morgenthau and Kenneth Walsh have said, power, national interest, survival, self-help, anarchic society. So I think we know all those things, and we try to fix all those elements into and embed that along with the broad contours of India's foreign policy as we do this outreach with the rest of the world, particularly in ASEAN, Southeast Asia, and beyond. The next is the neo-realist theory, particularly people like Robert Keohane and Joseph Nye. They say, okay, power is important, national interest is also equally important, survival, of course, is very, very crucial, but also I think you need to be capable of developing and translating those power into real actions. So that's how they say capabilities also is very significant factor to reckon with. Then we have got theories like constructivist theory in the 80s and 90s. People like Peter Kardinstein, Robert Wilpin, they say, okay, power is important, national interest is important, capabilities are important, survival is important. How about ideas? How about norms? You go to China, you go to South Korea, you go to Japan, you go to India. Now we are going to looking back into what Kautilya said in Arthashastra and trying to make sense out of it. So I think ideas and norms do matter. Okay, we are not saying this is the perfect model, but there are a lot of things we can learn from those kind of ideas. So I think the constructivists, they put a lot of emphasis, rightly so, on the ideas and norms. Then we have got thinkers like groupthink, people like Jenny Stein, Richard Ned Lebow, they say it's a combination, a culmination of the groupthink. That like during Kennedy administration and the Cuban Missile Crisis, they talked about the kitchen cabinet, the brain trust, okay? So like, for example, during Bajpayee's time with Brajesh Mishra and Pramod Mahajan, during Modi's time with S. Jaisankar, with Adit Jobhal and number of people, like during Manmohan Singh's time, first with K. Natwar Singh, then with Salman Khurshid, with Shiv Shankar Menon. So I think at different times, different elements, they also fit into this group thing, and they're trying to make a more cumulative aspect of the decision making. And finally, the decision-making theory itself. And one of the main proponents, as we all know, is Graham Allison. He talks about rational actor model, non-rational actor model. Do the leaders exhibit rational actors paradigm, or they deviate sometimes that? How do you perceive people like Kim Jong-un of North Korea? Is he rational or irrational? How do you perceive a person, for example, Saddam Hussein in Iraq, or Marcos in Philippines? And how the rest of the world, they look into it, how they perceive that. And so I think perception and misperception, that also are very, very important. So having said that, I think the second part of my presentation will be looking into the India's policy forecast for Indo Pacific or Asia Pacific in three broad ways: short term, which is 1 to 5 years, intermediate term, 5 to 10 years roughly, and then the long term, which is 10 years and beyond. I'm not going to say this is exactly going to happen and this is the way, because, you know, as I said, a lot of the things are very fluid, very dynamic. What you see today, nobody predicted COVID-19 and the fallout, but it happened, and you have to deal with it. You have to deal with the big elephants in the room, and you have to cope with different management strategies, etc. So I think if you look at it from the India's point of view, how they view the Indian decision makers, the scholars, the think tanks, the overall picture in Asia Pacific versus the Indo Pacific, I think it will be the following. For example, we'll see in the areas of the soft areas, we'll see a lot of exchanges, particularly in terms of educational exchanges, cultural exchanges between India and Singapore, India and Japan, India and Australia, India, New Zealand, India, Philippines, and many other things. Number two, I think in the short term, again, we are already witnessing that India's competitive edge in the computer software. Because, for example, a country like Japan, I remember a couple of years ago when Prime Minister Yoshihiro Mori, he visited India, the first stop he made was not in Delhi, which is usually the place people come, the heads of state and head of government, because Delhi happens to be the capital. But he chose to fly directly into Bangalore. The reason being, Bangalore is also the Silicon Valley of India. That's where you have got Infosys, Wipro, TCS, all these big computer giants, etc., and the startups. So I think because of computer software, and also particularly in the last 10, 15 years, including the Modi government, they're putting a lot of emphasis on the digital diplomacy through computer software advantage, and also trying to take advantage and also a coalition with countries like Japan and Korea, Taiwan, etc., where they have the hardware technological expertise. So trying to match both the things. Next is, I think also in the Asia-Pacific and Indo Pacific, we see Japan increasingly extending the olive branch of ODA, official development assistance, to many countries in this region, in South Asia and Southeast Asia, including India. In Delhi, for example, we all know that the underground metro system is completely funded by the Japanese ODA and the JICA. And India's polio eradication drive in Bengal and many other places, the forestation drive, the bullet train project from Mumbai to Ahmedabad, etc. These are all part of the Japanese ODA to India. At the same way, India also extended its hand to other countries as well. During the recent COVID pandemic, Prime Minister Modi extended the hand of cooperation and support by supplying the vaccines to not only the country of SAARC, but also the countries of ASEAN and beyond. I think that also enhances the reputation and prestige and credibility of an emerging big power like India. We have got emerging Indian diaspora also in Singapore, in Malaysia, in Philippines, in Fiji, and many other places. I spent a long time in Japan. Even in a place which is very monocultural like Japan, they also have an emerging and vibrant diasporic population. And as we have seen, Government of India in the last 10, 20 years, they are also putting a lot of emphasis on the diasporic diplomacy, or the importance of diaspora in the shaping of the Indian foreign policy decision making. We also will witness, I believe, in the short term, China, Japan, India triangular relationship, and what one scholar said, a policy of engagement vis-a-vis China. And what is engagement? I think it's a combination of containment of the Cold War, how to contain the spread and influence of China, along with, at the same time, you have to engage with China wherever you can. So I think a lot of this tussle, the turf battle is going on, and not only between China and India, but also with Japan. So you can say it like a triangular relationships, and in many different ways. And I'll come in a minute how, for example, China wants to develop BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, One Belt, One Road. At the same time, Prime Minister Modi is coming up with his own visionary plan in the Bay of Bengal in terms of BIMSTEC, or in terms of Project Mausam or Sagarmala projects, trying to link up relationship and enhance relationship with the countries from Bangladesh to Sri Lanka to Maldives and other places. We also will see in the short term, Japan, India, Australia, Singapore, in terms of the defense diplomacy, the tsunami diplomacy. As Ambassador Yogendra Kumar said, I think the defense diplomacy like Malabar exercise and a lot of the other exercises, that is also taking a preponderance in the scheme of things in the South Bloc in the terms of India's foreign policy making. The tsunami diplomacy of 2004 December, that also combined all the technical expertise, and I think all these countries are also trying to be a part of that. This morning, I was just listening to some of the newspapers in like Washington Post and New York Times. Very recently, as we all know, there was an agreement between Australia and United Kingdom and United States of America to provide nuclear submarines to Australia. And today, I think there are some scholars who says maybe we can include India also into that particular, India and Japan. So whether it will be included or not, that I think remains to be seen. But having said that, Japan, India, Australia, Singapore, in many ways, they are having defense relationship and tsunami. Next, I think what we'll see is interdependent and interconnected Asian community. For example, India has currently, they have got the green revolution. We have got the white revolution in terms of milk and dairy products, and also the blue economy in terms of the marine ecology and marine resources. And also, as Professor Nagalakshmi said at the very outset, not only 1991, the post-1991 of Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh, the Look East policy, which Sushma Swaraj in 2014 said it is not only look east, it is act east. I think if you look at all these things, the blue revolution, the green revolution, the white revolution, the look east policy, the act east policy, reaching out, outreach to Southeast Asia, to ASEAN, and also trying to invigorate the SAARC and BIMSTEC, I think, and also Sagar, security and growth for all in the region. I think that is providing a template for interdependent and interconnected Asian community. Next is multilateralism in the area of non-traditional security. For example, energy security, climate change, maritime security, natural disaster, drugs, piracy, counter-terrorism, sustainable development, freedom of navigation, increasing connectivity. And we would like all to do that within these three boundaries of rule-based international order, free and open inclusive region, and also putting emphasis on the Indian Ocean region and the littoral countries. So I think I foresee at least some of the things I just outlined in the short term between 1 to 5 years is probably going to be realized. Next is forecast for immediate term, which is 5 to 10 years down the road. For example, we'll see like a lot of people that tout India to be not only an important hard power, but also a soft power. As Joseph Na has said, the politics of attraction and combining with the politics of coercion. So we'll see a balance of power, a judicial mix between India's hard power and soft power. So when I say, for example, just give you a few examples, which I'm sure all of you are aware, in terms of India's hard power, India is among the top 10 armies of the world, currently ranked 4th, based on combination of manpower, technology, firepower, training, and resources. Military hardware, nuclear weapon capability that we acquired from Pokhran 2 onwards in 1998, nuclear deterrence in both air, navy, and air force, missile capabilities, Agni 1 to Agni 5 with more than 5,000 kilometer range, development of ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, the latest one is BrahMos, plus you can add maybe Nag and Trisul, they will also be developed. Nuclear submarines like INS Arihant, etc. Nuclear Disaster Management Authority, NDMA, to fight chemical, biological, and nuclear warfare. Not many countries in the world, they do have that. India's defense cooperation with US, Israel, Russia, France, UK, Japan. So we are not putting eggs in one basket. Basically, we are diversifying in terms of the defense procurement. At the same time, we are putting a lot of emphasis on indigenous production as well. Military exercises, exercises on land, air, and sea. Malabar exercise, just one example, which I have said. Anti-piracy operations in the high seas, that is also a very, very important thing, particularly in the free and uninhibited access through the Arabian Sea, Indian Ocean, and the Bay of Bengal, and all the way to Strait of Malacca. In terms of India's soft power, I'm sure all of you are aware, India's public diplomacy, Bollywood, India's music, India's literature, India's democratic traditions, open society, non-alignment, India's cuisine, textiles, Indian exports, media, India's education sector, Indian diaspora, which has been touted as model minority by many countries, India's elite scholars like Mohandas K. Gandhi, Rabindranath Tagore, Kautilya, India's splendid diversity, multiculturalism, unity in diversity, and putting that within the context of composite culture, the core values, truth, tolerance, humanism, ahimsa, Ayurveda, yoga, cricket, Indian spirituality. I think we can go on and on. I'm sure you can also add some more aspect of that. So in the intermediate term, balance of power between hard and soft. Next, I think emergence of Asian security community. We do have bilateral defense alliance between US and Japan, US and South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and US, and just some people are talking about ASEAN NATO, combining maybe Philippines, maybe Indonesia, Malaysia, etc. Some people are saying maybe we do it more in a bilateral way, like Philippines, US Singapore, US Thailand, etc. Next is time of profound transition that we will witness probably in the next 5 to 10 years, namely instability, global warming, changing climate, rapid population growth, resource scarcity, etc. Shift in the distribution of global power. As we all know, from 1945 to 1990, basically it was a bipolar world between US and SU, United States and Soviet Union. Then 1990 to roughly 2000, 2001, it was a unipolar world, the end of Cold War, the post-Cold War with the US as the sole superpower. Then from 2001 onwards, after post-9/11, you can say, it is more like a multipolar world. China is now a more assertive power. There are many other powers which are also very much powerful. And also, I think if you look at the theory of Charles Kindleberger, he talked about hegemonic stability theory. And I think now we see in the 21st century, it has led to declining hegemon or the loss of hegemony. Not only that, we also see in the last couple of years, the rise of middle powers like Japan, like Iran, like many other countries. They're also coming to the picture. Also the rise of small powers. Like who could have imagined that a small, tiny country in the Persian Gulf like Qatar, which will play such an important role in the recent episode on the Taliban's coming to Kabul or in Afghanistan. A small power like Vietnam, it is now being wooed by everybody. Lloyd Austin, the US Defense Secretary, visited Kamala Harris, the Vice President, and even India also is putting a lot of emphasis in its relation with Vietnam. The Asian century, everybody is saying that it is the 21st century will be Asian century, unlike the 20th, which was American, and the 19th, which was the 20th, which was American, and the 19th, which was European. But the thing is, what will be the pecking order? Is it going to be China, India, Japan, or China, Japan, India, or India, China, Japan? I think that remains to be seen depending on the power configurations. In the intermediate term, the volatile geographical regions in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, Malacca Strait, Arunachal Pradesh, Ladakh, Korean Peninsula, the Taiwan Strait, the China Xinjiang province between Uyghurs and Chinese population, and of course, the insurgency problems in the Northeast and Maoist insurgency in part of India's hinterland. We also might see emergence of some ultra-nationalism in China, Japan, India, and the creation of the security dilemma. Now, coming to the final point, the forecast for a long term. Okay? And this may happen, some of the things can happen, some of the things may not happen. And when I say long term, I mean 10 years and beyond. But I think one of the things might happen is we might see a form of new Cold War, and that new Cold War will be exemplified by concept of power between cooperation/rivalry. So we'll see institutions like BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SAARC, ASEAN, but we'll also see competing between, for example, BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, vis-a-vis India, Sagarmala, Project Mausam, etc. The Quad, for example, that is again another emerging one. Some people are even talking about Quad Plus by including Vietnam, South Korea, and New Zealand. Secondly, I foresee that there is going to be an emergence of a multipolar balance of power between China, India, Russia, Japan, US, Australia, New Zealand, etc. How that multipolar things will take place, it remains to be seen. Rise of an autocratic democratic divide that might also happen, like China and Russia on the one hand and US-led coalition. This December, 3 months from now, President Biden has called a meeting in Washington, DC called Coalition of the Democracies. So I think some people say this is an euphemism for trying to develop some kind of democratic alternatives to a perceived autocratic model of China and Russia. Next one is, there is a possibility of China-America co-hegemony, if we love loaded terms like hegemony. But I think if you go for a less loaded term, instead of co-hegemony, maybe China and America might prefer to be a co-leader or co-partner or co-facilitator. Next is, I think I can see the rise of a multiplex world. Scholar Amitabh Acharya has talked about that. Basically, I think what multiplex worlds means is, like in a multiplex movie house, you see simultaneously couple of movies are running and we can pick and choose while popping popcorn. So in a multiplex world, the Western dominance will be there. America will be an important power. Canada will be there, Australia, France, Great Britain, China, South Korea, Japan. But I think the global South will also have its own voice. They will also be an emerging power to deal with. Next is possibility of continuation of American security hegemony and alliance cooperation. India might be integrated into it and China might accommodate. Next is multipolar regional security system with balance of power of leading regional countries: Japan, India, Australia, China, Indonesia, South Korea, Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, etc. Influence of external actors will still be there: US, Russia, European Union, UK, France, all of those countries. In terms of Sino-Indian relationship, China and India, we'll see again, as I said, both cooperation and competition. Of course, there will be competition in terms of BRI in South China Sea, in terms of what China does in Hong Kong and Taiwan. But in terms of cooperation, we'll also see climate change, COVID-19, diplomacy, the economic sector, the infrastructure model, taking meaningful part in BRICS and SCO, where both of us are there. Even in SAARC, China is also an observer status. We'll see probably in the long term, US, China, India triangle, trying to match both engagement as well as estrangement. We might see continental versus maritime coalition. Water crisis might be an important factor in the long term all over the world, including in Asia Pacific, Mekong River, Indus, the Ganges, Brahmaputra, and we have seen how relationship has affected vis-a-vis Pakistan, Bangladesh, China, etc. Aging population, I think that will have impact on geopolitics and geoeconomics, because that is going to change the demography. Countries like Japan, South Korea, etc., as the people age more and there is a vacuum of the young population. We see more emergence of pandemics, destructive economic, political, social, psychological, security consequences: SARS, H1N1, swine flu, Ebola, and of course now currently COVID-19 with all the variants, including Delta. The threat of WMD, weapons of mass destruction, the threat from North Korea, bioterrorism, cyber security challenges. So yes, cyber terrorism will be an important factor. The space power competition and cooperation, use of space technology in Asia Pacific between Japan, China, and India is trying to outbid and outcompete one another. We'll see probably some possible movement in terms of disaster management, digital connectivity, capacity building, marine ecology, marine resources. And I think finally the point I would try to say before I conclude, the three major countries in Asia Pacific or Indo Pacific, India, Japan, and China, I think at the end of the day, along with Australia, US, and other countries, they will try to protect and manage their national, regional, and global security interests with either nuclear deterrence or nuclear weapons or nuclear umbrella. So I think with this, I will conclude my presentation. And again, thank you to Professor Nagalakshmi, Dr. Divya Anand, Ambassador Yogendra, all the speakers in the distinguished speakers in the panel. So thank you once again for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. That was really very extensive, and you have covered right from realism to this, all the aspects. It was really a wonderful session. I'm sure students must have really learned a lot. So now I give the floor to Professor Satish Kumar, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. I will be very brief, ma'am, very brief and pointed, because I have a meeting at 3:30 with the Vice Chancellor, so I will rush to the busy office. But nonetheless, this is not my domain. This is not my area. So I think a challenge is given by you. You wanted me to speak on on Asia Pacific and Indo Pacific. In fact, my area is Central Asia and a bit of South Asia. But nevertheless, your adorations and your liking makes me to speak certain generic things which I observe from the Asia-Pacific to the Indo-Pacific. What are the changes which are perceptible as a citizen of India and as a research scholar of international politics? What I believe that there is definitely a Indo-Pacific is a recent connotations. I think it emerged in the 2017 by the US President, then US President Donald Trump, and then it has magnified, but it is still evolving. It has not completely have taken a proper shape. Whereas when we talk about the Asia-Pacific, it is the three major regions of East Asia, Southwest Asia, and Southeast Asia that combines together countries which are located on the Pacific Oceans, where the China has gradually becoming an important player and trying to push back America. So there is a conflict between the two. The moment, the first perceptible changes what we see, the moment we come from the Asia-Pacific to the Indo-Pacific, what do we see? The conflict between the two becomes a little larger, and larger in terms of favoring India. There are many powers like Japan, Asian countries. There are 4 continents. The 4 continents come together. Asia, Europe, then Australia and America. And combining all 4, that gives leverage to India. That gives leverage to India. The Indian conceptions of the multipolarity, the changing dynamics of the multipolarity gets cemented, gets weightage the moment we try to conceptualize about the Indo-Pacific, where the Asia-Pacific is completely US versus China, and the conflict between the two remains a bipolarity. But this Indo-Pacific is a larger canvas. The second important things which I perceive the Indo-Pacific, India's understanding of the world politics, where China is a very tough to leave the space for India. That gives an, I think, an important clue. An important clue in terms of economic and strategic space. It is, at least today, it is difficult for India, whether it was through the Lucas policy or active policy, to monitor China, to control China, or to block China in the East Asia and other regions is still a little difficult. But in the moment we enlarge the space of, and it comes into the larger areas of Indo-Pacific, where along with other powers, India plays an important role, that becomes a little easier for India. That becomes a little easier for India to at least to slow the space of China. The way the China was moving ahead in 90s and early 2000, after 2000, now the pace of Chinese development is going to be challenged by the Quad, the 4 important countries all together. So as it has been said by the senior faculty, the ambassador, the importance and relevance of Indo-Pacific and Asia-Pacific, they have very in detail narrated the challenges for the world politics and especially for India. So my basic underpinnings is that it is Indo-Pacific is an evolving concept. So we are not going to focus, and that should not be the priorities of India's foreign policy to think about it of the Asia-Pacific. We have already moved out from Asia-Pacific to the Indo-Pacific. Our Lucas policy and active policy are more directed towards the Indo-Pacific, and as China is trying to move around through the Gadar port and through, I think, taking the leverage of Iran and other Middle Eastern countries to Africa, it could be developmental economics of China could be controlled in this region, and that could be, I think, for a lesson for China of providing a larger space for India in the world politics. So far, China is very meager, China is very rigid, and it is not, the world politics is changing from Eurocentric to Asia-centric. But Asia-centric does not mean only China. Asia-centric means at least to certain extent acknowledging the power of India, but which has not been done by China, and that is how the coming years are going to be two-way conflict. First layer of conflict between which is going on, it is between USA and China, and the second way of conflict would be between India and China for the space. So the focus of this conflict, if it is not in Asia-Pacific, if it is Indo Pacific, that will become easier for India. India will have a larger partners consisting of the 4 continents of moving together. I think I am facing a time crisis and knowledge crisis also. So very honestly, accepting the fact that I have to rush to the meeting, I'm extremely sorry for and apologetic. I have learned my seniors, and it was a very prolific outpourings of the knowledge of Asia-Pacific by our respected ambassador and respected Professor Mohammad Badrul Sahab, who was, I think, very well connected with my department of political science at IGNOU. So, and Madam Naglakshmiji and all my young friends. I'm extremely sorry, ma'am, that I have to rush back, but honestly accepting my knowledge is also limited to speak on. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, and thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Professor Satish Kumar, sir. But your deliberation was short and sweet. But there are some questions which has come up. Should I ask the questions? It is to the ambassador. Can I ask the question, sir?
Sure, just 1 second. Let me just put it on. 1 second. Yes, please. Yes, please.
Yeah, the question that has come is, how does India prevent China from building its ties in the Indo Pacific region? Now, as many of our neighbors change their perception, go with China instead of India. For instance, talking about Sri Lanka and Nepal. So, your view.
Right, thank you. I think one point, of course, is very clear that even in the Cold War, when the relations could be very easily controlled to a large extent between the two countries and war-backed countries, it's not a situation anymore like that. And all countries, in a way, are quite open to seeing through where they can get a better deal, whether it's from India or from China. So the point here is that background noise coming. There's background noise coming.
Just a second.
Yeah. So thank you. So the point here is that there is space for both India and China to actually play their diplomatic carry out the diplomatic activities, building relationship. But relationship is a two-way street. I mean, a country will engage with India only if it finds benefit from that kind of engagement on that particular issue. So that the same thing applies in the case of China. So as I see today the situation, the way it is, after all, why is it that the US felt that it was in a position to execute a pivot to Asia? It is because the fact that a lot of countries started feeling that China was becoming overbearing, that it was building those land features in South China Sea. It was actually, in a way, threatening some of the other countries which were making similar claims, and it was actually dragging its feet in developing confidence-building measures for South China Sea, for example. Deliberately keeping the Taiwan Strait maritime claims actually keeping it deliberately vague. So the Chinese strategy actually, I would even say that the strategic ambiguity is very much a part of their grand strategy, to keep the other person guessing whether you are a friend or foe as to what really you're asking for. So then it gives you a greater leverage for bargaining and negotiating, and actually in a way to bring the relationship, shape the relationship to a certain state, so to say. So in the case of South China or Southeast Asia, what clearly happened was that A, this feeling was growing, a sense of overbearing kind of assertiveness on the part of China. B, the kind of experience that people are having in terms of the unequal economic relationship with the Chinese. Of course, everybody needs money for development, so on and so forth. But the terms on which this economic partnership has been developed, the infrastructure project being developed, they were actually seen to be actually rather unfavorable. I mean, you are under pressure, but you take it. But the fact of the matter is that you know that it's being actually loaded against you. So that is the reason why I think, I mean, that's what I understand. Why, for example, when the Americans executed the pivot to Asia, and people even now say it's not a full pivot. But the fact of the matter is that it was actually in a way engineered by the Philippines, by Singaporeans, and by a whole lot of other people, and that gave them the leverage and the room for maneuver. For example, the case of Malaysia, if you remember the famous the railway contract which was given, when Mahathir came to power, he said we can renegotiate it. But that leverage they would not have had, let's say, some time earlier. The same thing in the case of Sri Lanka. I mean, Sri Lanka now actually declared a financial emergency because the fact that, you know, it's the terms on which it is, it's getting the money for building those kind of projects, Hambantota and elsewhere. They find that, you know, they are not getting the return on that as required. And on the other hand, because of the fact that this kind of the project modeling or economic modeling is such that it actually allows, let's say, China to actually gain more assets or to derive some other kind of benefit. So, or in the case, you can take the same thing in the case of Nepal, you can take the same thing in the case of Pakistan, take the case of Myanmar. They've actually had to scale down or cancel projects. So the fact of the matter is that when they know they have an option, then they can get better terms. Same thing applies to India. So long as in India's case, we can offer them good terms, they will be actually willing to engage. So that is in terms of the kind of relationship we're developing. The second point is that I do not think that in South Asia, certainly, the balance of power has shifted in favor of China. I think all, whether it's Nepal or it is Sri Lanka or whichever other country, they all know, even the case, I can argue even about Pakistan or Maldives. The fact of the matter is that they all realize that there are certain deadlines that you cannot cross. Because if you cross those deadlines, you actually have a problem because India is far closer in that sense. It has far more levers to actually press that China has, for example. I mean, Nepal, for example, like even Sri Lanka. I mean, in terms of our proximity, the fact that we have power projection capability and so on and so forth. It's not very easy. So the Sri Lanka are doing, what are they doing? They're trying to take advantage of either side to see where they can get better terms. Maldives, for example, if you come too close, I mean, the case of the previous president, Maldivian president, he actually practically joined the Chinese camp. There was reaction against him. And now you find a different kind of foreign policy being followed. Nepal, the same thing. Even the case of Pakistan, I would say, which actually is much more, let's say, much more strategically, much more, it's much more critical issue. I mean, all this talk, frankly, all this talk about, two front and that sort of thing, well, there were signals being given when we had the standoff, and we are still having standoff on the LAC. Signals were coming out from Pakistan, they will take advantage of it. For example, in the early phase, there were reports, there were newspaper articles in Pakistani press linked to the Pakistani military that India, to distract attention of its public from the hammering it is getting on the LAC, actually will want to attack Pakistan, and therefore they were trying to mobilize. Well, nothing happened. Then you take the other incident. There was a very famous, it circulated on the social media, that video clip, short video clip, put out by the Chinese, where they show a Pakistani special forces officer on the front line of the the PLA's units, where he was actually, there was a PLA song, and this fellow was lip syncing. So there were signals being given out that India is actually in a pincer and can be squeezed from both sides, and you try to get your strategic advantage or whatever. But what happened? I think this is my take. In fact, Nepal tried the same thing. I mean, if you remember the Kalapani issue, it was raised at the time when India actually was facing a build-up of the Chinese troops in the LAC. So the Kalapani was raised. In fact, remember that Nepalese Prime Minister ordered the troops to be deployed on the along that. Troops to be deployed on the Kalapani boundary, and he actually forced the chief of the army staff of Nepalese army to actually pay a visit there. This is a kind of way to put pressure that not only is India going to face a two-front military pressure, but a three-front, including China, including Nepal. Nothing happened, frankly. I mean, we have, in fact, just recently a statement from I think he's the corps commander of Kashmir area, I think, or Northern Command, I think, who said that the ceasefire agreement signed between India and Pakistan in January is actually practically held. So the earlier, in fact, let me go back even further. In the case of Kargil crisis, for example, we were actually somehow, that's why say if you have a more determined leadership and more powerful leadership, then things actually, people get the signal. So in the case of Kargil, for example, the Kargil crisis was taking place, and we were actually at that time engaging the Pakistani troops in Kargil Heights. The Chinese built a road from finger 8 to finger 4 at that time. So obviously, in a way, they were turning the local situation to their advantage. And merrily, they said that after everything was over, the Indian troops can actually go across, use this road, and do their patrolling up to finger 8 and go back. When the LAC crisis took place, which was engineered by them, when it took place, they said, no, you can't go on this road. So my point actually is that now, particularly, there's kind of a role played by the Indian army on the border, in particular, whether it's Galwan or elsewhere. I think they understood two things. I think happened. One is they understood clearly that India is going to push over. Number one. Number two, they also knew that that the Americans would also see that India is not pushed over. So there are ways in which you convey signals. There are ways in which whether it's target acquisition, whether it is other technology or whatever, you get the signal. The Chinese were actually writing the media saying that the Russians are still supplying weapons to India at the time when this kind of attention was taking place. So they also thought that Russia also has certain considerations, that the balance of power should not shift entirely or tilt too heavily on the side of the Chinese. So in one way, how I see things developing now is that there is a sense, that's why you find the middle powers, so Australia, you find Vietnam, you find Japan, India, you find other countries saying, the British, they're sending their kind of ships into the South China Sea and now, of course, in Taiwan Strait and elsewhere, because the fact that they know that beyond the point they cannot push, because Xi Jinping is also busy selling the China dream to his population. So I think these are assessments which are made, and in my view, I think what I'm trying to say is that I think this kind of new situation has developed a certain kind of power equilibrium, which I would say is not settled, but certainly the kind of power equilibrium is developing, which actually, in a way, is the right kind of thing to do. And at the same time, all countries, because of the fact that their own requirements, so they're certainly looking for opportunities for trade and economic cooperation, development, so on and so forth. India's concern about the Chinese really would be, I think that's a message which is going out, but I think it is done further, is that the Chinese investment of money in these fragile countries, the fragile economies, is actually something any rational leadership, I mean, desperate leaders will do desperate things, but rational leadership would know that they cannot go into that kind of a trap beyond the point. So I think that is basically how, in a way, it's a bit of a mix of a soft diplomacy, kind of messaging, at the same time to say that, India is not a pushover. I think they are signals that you said. Thank you. I finished. You're mute. Professor Nagalakshmi, you're mute.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So there is, thank you so much, sir. That was really, I think the students might have got their answer cleared. So there is one more question related to this, along with this. It's saying, has India planned on agreeing to form such a relationship? If so, will our country
Sorry,
will
with
be
whom?
trusted?
Relationship with whom?
Like the relationship that we are talking about with China, Japan, and India.
Mm-hmm.
So it is question is, as you were mentioning that the triangular relationship between China and Japan and India, will this relationship will be going to negatively affect the diplomatic relations with allies of India? That is one part. Along with this, the question is, has India planned on agreeing to form such a relationship? If so, will our country will be trusted by other allies, keeping in mind the problems created by China?
Oh, I think I was misunderstood. I did not say that India, China, and Japan, they are actually having a kind of a trilateral format. What actually I said was that there are different kinds of, initially, around 2007 or so, the earlier avatar of the Quad kind of thing, or the Malabar exercise, which was actually happening, where you had Singapore also in that, and Japan off and on. So the point, and Australia, of course, was there. So the point actually is that, at that time, the Quad actually, or whatever it was at that time, actually in a way it collapsed because Hu Jintao, who was the president of China at that time, he actually asked directly Manmohan Singh. He also made demarche with the Australian and Japanese. What is all this business? Or Singapore? So the point is that actually at that time, then Kevin Rudd actually had, when he took over as the Prime Minister, he actually said, this is all nonsense, I'm not interested in all that. Actually made the statement, which was not very pleasant kind of statement, but they made those statements. So the point actually is that, because it could not take place, so there were the other kind of formats. For example, India, China, Foreign Secretary and Defense Secretary dialogue, upgraded to Defense Minister and Foreign Minister dialogue. Japan, Australia had a similar dialogue at the ministerial level. India, Australia had that dialogue. We don't have the level of, I think now we recently got the level of minister, but before that we had the Foreign Secretary and the Defense Secretary. So we have this kind of format which actually avoid the situation when the Chinese would feel that everyone is ganging up against them. But now the momentum has built up in such a way that the Chinese are realizing that they have an image problem. And that image problem became very clear, particularly on account of the behavior during the COVID crisis. They thought that they'd cleared the COVID in their country and therefore they would start twisting arms of people in South China Sea or Southeast Asia or Japan or India or wherever. So I think that really caused them a bit of an image issue. And I remember following it closely because as soon as the COVID situation abated a little bit, the Chinese top diplomats were the most active going out. They're the first one to hit the air to go to meet. First they went to ASEAN, then they went to, I think they went to Europe, then they came to South Asia, then they went to Sri Lanka and elsewhere. So they were trying to build relations. Moscow and Xi Jinping was making phone calls to all kinds of all leaders. So I think there was an image issue which they actually faced. And to an extent that still continues, particularly with this current controversy about the origin of the COVID-19 virus. So my point actually is that now the situation is different, and the Chinese realize that, you have to be conscious that the wolf warrior kind of a diplomacy can take you up to one point, but not beyond that. Now, even whether you are Vietnam or you are Indonesia or whoever you are, you can have all turn around and say, no, don't browbeat us. We know how to go around. So I think one is this kind of a thing. Secondly, the other thing I find is that, our engagement, let's say on the Asia-Pacific sense, the Russia, India, China trilateral format actually still goes on at the level of foreign ministers. So in fact, when External Affairs Minister went to Moscow for the SCO meeting, at that time, before that meeting, there was a lunch session where the Indian, Russian, and the Chinese external affairs ministers met. And after that, there was a meeting between India and the Chinese foreign ministers. So, there are these kind of things which are happening, but in a way, it tells you generally what is the state of play in global diplomacy. Everybody, you can push people or push countries up to a point, but when they know you can push no further, that's when you take a pause, because you know that now the consequences might be something which might affect you internally. So they are the kind of thing which people do calculations upon. And I hope, that's what I said, I ended my talk on the hope that this kind of binary actually becomes complementary rather than contradictory. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. There is one more question. One of our student, Nitish Pandey, would like to ask this question. He's saying in Galvin Valley, India has lost to petrol some points and China forced India to make it a non-man zone. India has stopped China to do further incursion, but at the same time, India has lost the patrolling right. The China is putting pressure on India, so when China invades Taiwan, it can stop India to take any action. How do you think the upcoming Sino-Indian relationship in this decade, because this is going to be the first time when India is going to deal with the country whose economy is 5.6 times bigger than the Indian economy?
Right, thank you. I think this is a brilliant question. So, frankly, I would not be able to give very precise answer in terms of, the patrolling zones in that sort of way. We can only go by what the government spokespersons are saying at the official level. And what they're saying is that this is a part of the kind of a freeze in terms of a part of, let us say, some kind of disengagement, not de-escalation. In the sense that, the areas which are contested in terms of patrolling zones, they are actually being cleared of patrolling on both sides. So if there is a kind of a perception of alignment of line of control with the Chinese, as far vis-a-vis India, then the Chinese do not come to that point. Similarly, our perceived line of actual control alignment, the Chinese do not come, we don't go that point. So actually that area becomes control free. But does it actually mean that either that the alignment of our boundary claims has changed? Certainly not. Does it mean in a way that the power balance has shifted in the Chinese favor? Certainly not. If that were the case, the Chinese would not be taking the initiative to actually, trying to restore the dialogue and all that. The second point, which actually is again a very interesting one regarding Taiwan. So, as I see the situation, whether Doklam or it is Galwan or wherever, what is interesting in my view is that on the line of actual control, the escalation initiative is in the hands of the Chinese. But in the case of Taiwan, Taiwan, the Chinese can escalate. In the case of North Korea, the escalation initiative is certainly not in the hands of the Chinese. North Korea actually is a bit of I think it's a rational actor. But North Korea actually has an initiative to create situation which can be a complication for the Chinese. So they can't control the escalation. South Korea and US can create an escalation for them if they can't control. Similarly, in the case of Taiwan, because of the excessive commitments which are there on the part of the US and others, now Japan also says that anything happening in Taiwan actually affects us in that sense. So my point actually is that for Chinese, it will be not very easy thing to do. That you are escalating, you are picking up fights on two distant fronts on your own. On your boundary with two countries. It's not very easy. In fact, I personally feel that in the Doklam, the Chinese actually, one of the factors was that North Korean crisis are boiling up. So they just didn't know where it's going to go. So this is a natural thing. After all, there is a cost attached to that. The cost is that, for example, China is very sensitive about the number of casualties that they have suffered in Galwan. And if you remember, you would have followed this in the news, that one Chinese blogger who actually has a very wide following, he said that the Chinese government is actually telling lies to the Chinese people about the number of casualties. in Galwan. That fellow has actually been picked up and sent and thrown into jail, and nobody knows where actually he is. The sensitivity of the Chinese, in fact, another occasion when I think it's Global Times, most probably, which actually said that no, it's not 4, it's 5 people who died. The next day they issued a correction. So the point is that you also understand the pain threshold of the other side. You may have 5 times your economy. You may have God knows how many times your military power, but your strategic environment is very different from India's. So you are trying to actually manage that strategic environment while trying to push wherever you can develop some advantage, which may help your leadership to continue to validate its legitimacy and to show that this is a leadership which is going to deliver the Chinese dream to the Chinese people. So these are very tricky decisions to make. So simple numerical calculation, okay, Chinese economy 5 times, okay, but Chinese economy 5 times that there are far more enemies than India has. And they have far bigger enemies than us, and they are facing the United States. They're facing North Korea. North Korea can create problems for them, So Japan. But what I'm trying to say is that every country in that, so even for us, there's a pain threshold. You don't want that pain threshold to be actually crossed, because then you have domestic problems. And Xi Jinping actually has his domestic issues. Political consolidation is going on, and so on and so forth. So I think these factors, they are the real, let's say, the realistic calculus as far as national leaders are concerned when they take decisions of this magnitude.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. So, one question to Professor Badrur Alam, sir. This question is from Lakshmi. Sir, since you have mentioned tsunami and defense diplomacy, could you share your views on vaccine diplomacy in these testing times of the pandemic as a reflection of the power politics in the region?
Okay, thank you very much. I think while answering this particular question, I would also like to add a few things that Ambassador Yogendra sir just said. I think if you look at very closely at China, particularly in the last 15-20 years, from Deng Xiaoping to Jiang Zemin to Hu Jintao to directly Xi Jinping, I think one thing is consistent. I don't think they are stupid. I think they're very mature. They're very smart. They're very pragmatic. And they know how to move in a very incremental and consistent way. They will, of course, try to maximize their leverage, their national interest, which I think every country does, will do. But I think beyond a particular point, they will not try to upset the so-called delicate balance of power that exists, whether it is between China and India, China and Southeast Asia, China and Japan, whether it is Senkaku Islands, and talking even for a minute about Afghanistan, the coming of the Taliban 2.0. I think Chinese are very astute that what is going on. I think they know that they will take advantage of the window of opportunities, but I think at the same time, they are also very much aware of the window of vulnerabilities. Because if they like to push the envelope too far and trying to have a more exclusive government in Kabul, only talking to the Taliban of the present leadership, Gaza, etc., and exclude India and other players, I think that will not be in their short-term interest. That will also not be in their long-term interest, because there are other players in the region. They are all important stakeholders, whether it is Tajikistan or Turkmenistan or Iran or Turkey, Qatar. I think everybody will try to extract their own pound of place. And also, I think Chinese are also very much aware of the Uyghur population, the Muslim minorities there. They try to push the envelope too hard. So who knows? Kabul and Kandahar might be the center of new global jihad, and which might go against the more national interest of China. So I think they know that. They're trying to develop in a very calibrated way, whether it is One Belt, One Road, BRI, Silk Road project, etc., or even in South China Sea, or whatever things to do in Taiwan or Hong Kong. But they're also very oblivious to the power equation of the new changing dynamics, whether it is the Biden administration or Macron in France, Boris Johnson in UK, Modi in India. So I think they're very much pragmatic. They will try to prove that their interests are being served at the same time. And as far as India is concerned, I think a lot of times, I think we try to go for a long-term gain even if it means short-term pain, meaning that even if we have to cut down some losses with Bhutan or Nepal in terms of territorial give and take, or Bangladesh, or some other issues with Maldives or Sri Lanka, I think we should have a more long-dated view, how we can cultivate that. And I think the two measures that I highlighted, the Sagarmala project, the project Mosam project of Prime Minister Modi, and trying to integrate, also involve the SARC and the BIMSTEC countries, etc. I think it's a good step in the right direction. Coming to your question on vaccine diplomacy, if you remember last year when the COVID pandemic struck India, I think India was one of the first countries to reach out to all the countries in the SARC and also to other countries of the region, okay, to the extent possible. And I think that really created quite a reservoir of goodwill among the different countries in terms of supply. Because, we have to take care of both economic opportunities. At the same time, I think India should do great work also supplying to other countries in Africa and many countries. COVID diplomacy, along with if you add with whatever we did in the tsunami diplomacy or in terms of some of the natural disaster. For example, I recollect a couple of years ago when there was an earthquake that struck Nepal, India was one of the first countries to airlift all the essential items to Kathmandu, to other places in Nepal. So I think that is being recognized. So I think this is a good, smart move. I think you can call it like an extension of the Gujarat doctrine and our extension of the Modi 2014, the first one, when during the swearing-in ceremony, he invited all the heads of governments and states of the SARC. So I think this is not only symbolism, I think it goes beyond symbolism, that whenever we are in trouble, we can count on India. So India should not be seen in a more malignant, like a big brother, but it can also be a benign good brother. But of course, India has its own interest. India has its own role to play in Indo Pacific, whether it is in Quad, but it is not more security conscious, but I think it's a more expansive kind of mode. I think that's how I will address it.
Thank you so much, sir. So almost we are coming to the end of the session. Sir, I would just give you some viewpoint, and I would like to have your comment on that. Sir, what I have come across is, like, we can see that for almost 70 years, the system of order in the Asia-Pacific region, often referred to as Pax Americana and dominated by US, had not been called into question. Now, this has changed in the second decade of 21st century, especially in the context of China's rise to become the world's largest economy, which has also changed the regional balance of power in political and military terms. So Beijing has developed its own ideas and concepts of regional order and subsequently launched its own initiatives. So these moves are driven by Beijing, increasing claim to shape or reshape the regional as well as the international order in accordance to which its own interest. So the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, as Alam sir was talking about, is a direct expansion of this claim. Right, sir? So in response to this, in recent years, number of states have developed the alternative concepts under the label Indo-Pacific. The first and foremost, the US, the President Trump has attempted to respond directly to the perceived Chinese challenge by presenting a strategic concept called Free and Open Indo-Pacific, FOIP, right? So as a counter narrative to a potential Sino-centric reorganizations, or you can say restructuring of the region. So in addition, Japan, Australia, India and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, that is ASEAN, have also presented their own concepts of Indo-Pacific. Now here, the France is the only member state of the European Union that has adopted the term Indo-Pacific and drawn upon the corresponding strategy, which derives mainly from the protection of national interests in its own territories in the region. Now, China, on the other hand, has rejected the concept of Indo-Pacific and the FOIP in particular as a containment strategy directed against Beijing. Now, the present analysis here shows that there is no uniform Indo-Pacific concept to date. Rather, the term is used by US, Japan, Australia, India, and ASEAN to refer very different in the part of divergent concepts, which in turn are based in different ideas in the regional order. So, you give your comments on this. So, what is your take or what is your comment on this? Sorry, sir. Hello.
You want me to speak first?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. So I think you are right, because in one way China has been able to develop a certain kind of let's say some kind of structure for economic cooperation with Southeast Asian countries, particularly Southeast Asian countries, also with the Eastern Pacific countries. And this is economic. The economic comes also capacity for political and even some kind of, let's say, military presence. Now, what actually happened also along with that is, particularly in South China Sea, the Chinese have somehow made it to a core issue and therefore made it to an issue of critical importance to them. The problem, the thing in my view actually, is that to me it seems as more a function, a more aspect of the internal power dynamic. Because if I'm in their place, I would certainly not be so cruel in doing that. I mean, you are here trying to do something which is actually in a way that with the one hand you're twisting somebody's arm, and on the other hand saying, okay, I'll give you a loaf of bread, you can have that, but I'll keep twisting your arm. Now, countries may accept sometimes they are in situations so they may do that, but the moment they find an option, let's say we won't do that. And the reaction becomes quite obvious. So in one way, the pivot to Asia, it was because of a strategic assessment part of the mechanism that there is a certain sentiment in whether it's South China Sea, or whether it's Taiwan Strait, or whether it's the country for Japan, that or in the case of the Pacific Island countries, that the Chinese are actually twisting around. So that was one thing. The second thing, of course, was that, as I said, that this project that they're doing does actually usurious. I mean, you had earlier, I think, a Mekong Delta kind of a platform, which actually, when the Chinese are dominating so much, that became dysfunctional, and then actually it was supported by the ADB. And in fact, the Chinese started their own program of Mekong kind of cooperation. And the Chinese on the defensive all the time because taking it off water, they actually, they're causing drought and economic ecological degradation in all these Mekong Mekong sort of countries, Mekong basin countries. So, if you are being so aggressive in a way, or maybe also considerate about the country is smaller around you, there's bound to be a reaction. So in one way, I think what really happened is that the diffuse nature of Indo-Pacific as a concept, in a way, actually is helped because you can interpret according to your own interests as whatever is your comfort level. But in a way, it's come to encapsulate a certain sentiment. And the whole idea actually, in a way, is a good one in the sense that you're not only just thinking and saying that, okay, the Chinese are acting like this because the fact that they suddenly feel that the balance of power shifted in their favor. So that there be a pushback. So some countries will come together and say, let's push them back. The other aspect of that, of course, is that, if the Chinese have a faulty model of economic cooperation, project, infrastructure, and so on and so forth, well, we can provide a better model of cooperation. So you look at that, you see how you can address the issues about ecological degradation. You can look at the issues as to how you can, for example, as I said, make sure that the economy actually remain good. But the problem here again is that ASEAN was the first multilateral organization along with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which actually was the platform where the Chinese first began to feel comfortable with multilateral diplomacy. Because up till that time, the only exposure about United Nations where they're doing what they were doing was. But here they would actually play an active multilateral diplomatic role. So it provided them the comfort level. But as they became more powerful, they split up the ASEAN. So ASEAN cannot take a position as they were taking earlier on the South China Sea, the sort of confrontation with the Chinese were initiating. Earlier they were taking those positions, but later on they can't take this position. And first you have this whole dance around the declaration on the code, declaration of confidence, something in South China Sea, 2002. That was because they came under pressure because of the fiery reef episode and those kind of things. And then they said, okay, now we'll have a code of conduct. They've been discussing this code of conduct last 10 years or more. And even now they are still not going, they're not able to do that. So the point is that by keeping this kind of deliberate ambiguity, now actually they have revised even the claims on the South China Sea. Earlier they said we talk about islands, then they said, okay, we talk about territorial sea. Now they're saying, no, it's not territorial sea, we're talking about exclusive economic zone. We're talking about continental shelf. They declared in the Paris, they declared baselines. All these are not allowed under the UNCLOS. The point is that you can say, okay, these land features are ours, okay, you say that. But you're making these claims on what basis? Is it based on UNCLOS? It's based on your national history, it's based on what we show. And now this is the latest thing, because I think last year they said, we also can claim continental shelf across the land features. The tribunal war, actually they said, no, none of these islands can actually get sustained life. Therefore, there's no way in which you can actually have an exclusive economic zone. They're talking the exclusive economic zone, they're talking about continental shelf, they're not talking about spot. So, people understand these things, those who follow these things understand. So, my point actually is that because of that, there is the kind of model being developed. Second thing people realize is, is that all dependence, even economically, is not a good thing, because whichever country you're over dependent upon will exploit that for their other purposes. So you talk about flexible trade links. You talk about those kind of things. And the second thing to realize is that even middle countries can actually give a push back, because the Chinese have their own dream to sell. What cost do the Chinese people want to pay for somebody that reaches? So you find that in a way, let's say the kind of a more freewheeling interpretation of the Indo Pacific, in a way gives everybody comfort zone. And that's something which is good. The only thing here, as I feel now, is that people are looking, every national leader has his own problem developing the country, and those kind of domestic pressures. So if we all just open an empty talk, then I'm afraid it's not going to go anywhere. It actually has to be very like in a tsunami. 2004 tsunami was for us coming out on the Indo Pacific idea. So even in the case of war, if we are not in a position to actually show something on the ground as to what this alternate vision is, in that case, I'm afraid we are in for disappointment and some more chaos and trouble. I don't know whether I answered all questions. I will answer all your questions. Have I answered all the questions?
Yes, sir, you have answered all questions. Yeah, and yes, I think we can have a separate discussion with us so that we can have exchange, and we need to learn so much from you, sir.
Anytime, happily. I'm always happy to talk to those people. I'm always happy. I talk to them quite often.
Yeah. So, Badrur Alam sir, would you like to give add on to this suggestions and comments?
Basically, I agree with Ambassador Yogendra Kumar. All I will say is, look, in international relations, all the actors, nobody is an angel. Everybody acts according to their own national interest, their own self-interest. Everybody comes back to that realist paradigms. Of course, as far as China is concerned, in Asia, they would like to have a unipolar world, unipolar power, meaning they themselves, no competition with India or Japan or Korea or anybody else. And in the global arena, for that short term, they would like to have a bipolar world, US, Japan, China, US. And in the long term, again, a monopolar world or a unipolar world. But whether that will be translated into realities or not, I think that remains to be seen. But again, as I said, the Chinese leadership, particularly the present leadership, they are also used to the real politics. They know how much they can push the envelopes, and accordingly they will play their games, whether it is in Afghanistan or India or Indian Ocean, or in South China Sea, Taiwan and Hong Kong, or Senkaku Island, Japan. I think at the end of the day, they will settle down, bring back into complex, more deep, complex.
Okay, thank you so much. That was really excellent. There are so many things that is coming up that I would like to. We all can sit together and have a great brainstorming sessions on these points. Actually, and the time will fly off. We will not even know. Actually, we have to end the session now. So I would like to call upon the convener, Dr. Divya, to give the final version. Thank you once again, sir, for I'd like to thank all the panelists, and I would like to now call upon Dr. Divya.
Am I audible and visible as well?
Yes, Dr. Divya.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you. And it was really an enriching experience to have great academicians and diplomats in this panel discussion. So I'm sure all our students would have learned a lot on the contemporary developments along with the main theme. So since it's the contemporary topic, we have so many points to discuss upon. So I'm sure this session would have been run short in terms of
It's actually
further
short.
discussion. So Asia Pacific versus Indo Pacific, again, it will continue, the debate will continue. And so I would formally like to thank Professor Upendra Chaudhary, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for chairing the session. I know that you were running short in terms of time since you were traveling. So I, in a hurry, just started with your, that's why I called you in a hurry in the beginning itself. So it was my pleasure to have you over here. So I was expecting that you would speak for at least half an hour like last time, but unfortunately, because of your traveling plans, that could not happen. Thank you so much, Ambassador Yogendra Kumar, sir. Again, I have no words to say because yesterday when I had a word with you, so we were just discussing practical experience which you have given and your knowledge. It's like valuable input, sir. So sir, hats off, and I'm sure all our students would love to have the guest lectures with all the panelists and learn from the great academicians which we have today. Thank you so much, Yogendra Kumar, sir, and would look forward to have you again in the further academic discussions. So unfortunately, we did not have Professor Shanta ma'am and Rumki ma'am because of some personal reasons, which were informed just in today afternoon. And I would like to thank Professor Wajul Alam, sir. Sir, it's so nice to see you. Sir has been after me asking for the concept, schedule, so much. So sir was so excited, and I'm really happy to see you, sir, today here in person. And again, since you're very much familiar to the Amity University, so I'm sure with you we'll be having further engagements and lectures for our students, because academicians and the practitioners, the diplomats, they have the best of the experience and the basic output which they can give and they can share with the students and even to the young scholars. So we are also learning, we are also growing. So it's always good to have their blessings and always be in contact with them. Then Professor, am I audible? I think video is not visible.
No, audible and visible too. You're audible and yeah, you're not visible now. Yeah.
Visible now?
Yeah.
All right. So due to the change in the last minute, we invite, last minute it was Professor Satish Kumar sir who agreed to be a panelist, and it was all done in a rush because sir was busy and there were, because of certain changes, it was so, because sir wanted to speak more on this theme and he had the meeting with the Vice Chancellor, so sir had to leave again. So we are looking forward to have Satish sir for further deliberations, and he has been part of Amity Institute of International Studies for long in BOS and EAB. So looking forward to have sir in person, all the panelists in person. I would invite you, sir, all
all four of you to Amity University. Meet the students, meet the faculty members, and shower blessings on all of us. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Devi.
Over to Shivali, ma'am, for the formal thanks.
All right, thank you so much, Divya ma'am, for extending the thank yous on behalf of the entire institution. But I would also like to extend our thank yous on behalf of the students as well. Thank you to our panelists, His Excellency Ambassador Yogendra Kumar, Professor Muhammad Badrul Alam, Professor Dr. Satish Kumar, and Honorable Professor Upendra Chaudhary for such an enlightening session, and also Professor Dr. Nagalakshmi M. Raman for coordinating the session. This session has definitely enabled us, especially the students of AIIS, with a greater understanding on Asia-Pacific versus Indo-Pacific constructions. We couldn't be more grateful to have received your precious thoughts and time. The valuable inputs that has been fed into this topic today has given us a lot to think about, a lot of insight, and especially a lot of intellectuality for us to look up to. Thank you so much once again. To all the panelists, our professors, and everyone attending this session through Zoom as well as YouTube, I'd like to extend my humble thanks on behalf of the Amity Institute of International Studies, as well as the Amity University, Uttar Pradesh. Thank you so much for joining us today.